I'm Karishma Vaswani in Singapore. The headlines. Caught on the mountain, the moment trekkers run to escape landslides as a powerful earthquake hits the Indonesian island of Lombok. At least 14 people are dead. Cambodia's Prime Minister has claimed election victory, but critics say the vote was a sham.
Hello, I'm Ben Bland in London, also in the programme. Just hours before Zimbabweans head to the polls to elect a new president, the former leader, Robert Mugabe, breaks his silence, saying he won't vote for the man who pushed him out. Protests across Russia as thousands grab their chance to demonstrate against a possible rise in the pension age.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 6 a.m. in Singapore, 11 in the evening in London, and 6 a.m. on the Indonesian island of Lombok, where at least 14 people have been killed in a powerful earthquake. Indonesian President Joko Widodo is due to visit later on Monday. He's ordered the maximum relief effort to help survivors. Officials say hundreds have been injured and the number of casualties is expected to rise. The BBC's Pablo Ochoa has more.
Right side.
A scenic morning trek ending in panic. A mountain guide who was leading a trek on Indonesia's Mount Rinjani, a site popular with tourists, captured the moment the earthquake struck. The footage shows the group of climbers trying to get down the mountain as quickly as possible as clouds of dust rise from nearby landslides. This is what residents in northern Lombok woke up to. The quake of magnitude 6.4 was quickly followed by more than 100 smaller earthquakes. Thousands of homes were damaged. It's thought that dozens of people were injured by falling debris.
It happened all of a sudden, around 6 in the morning, and then everything collapsed. My house collapsed. My kid was inside, but thank God he's safe.
The epicenter of the earthquake struck 50 kilometers northeast of the city of Mataram in the north of the island. Indonesia is prone to earthquakes. It lies on what's called the Ring of Fire, the line of quakes and volcanic eruptions that circle virtually the entire Pacific Rim. The region is on constant alert for tremors that might trigger tsunamis. This time, no alert was issued. The country's disaster agency says the main focus now is evacuation and rescue. Authorities fear the number of people killed could rise. Pablo Ochoa, BBC News.
Well, the 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck Lombok, Bali and Sumbawa on Sunday morning when many people were sleeping. British tourist Julie Sylvester filmed the aftermath of the 6.4 magnitude quake in Kekalok, a small village on the island of Lombok.
Oh my God, look at the crack in the floor here. That's big. That's a big crack in the floor. I'm surprised it hasn't uprooted that tree. There's big cracks in the floor all over this place. The wall of this house broken. Massive damage over there to that greenhouse. The whole front of the place has been just ripped away. Their whole livelihood, their whole shop, their home, everything damaged beyond ruin. Look, that's a wardrobe there. Personal things, clothes hanging up, roof on the floor. Look at that house, completely ruined.
Really gives you a sense of the damage there. Some of the other stories making news today. Zimbabwe's former president, Robert Mugabe, has spoken out just before the country's first election since he was removed from office. He said the people of Zimbabwe had not been free since he was pushed out. Mr Mugabe also said he won't be voting for the man who succeeded him, Emerson Mnangagwa. The BBC's Nomsa Maseko is in Harare for us.
Well, the former president, Robert Mugabe, was trying to tell Zimbabweans that the way in which he was ousted remains to him undemocratic and unconstitutional. And he also said that the fact that the military, the tanks were rolled in to remove him. It says that Zimbabweans are threatened and that they are scared. And he also called on Zimbabweans to actually go out in their numbers to vote tomorrow, and also said that he will not be voting for ZANU-PF, which is a party that he himself founded and endorsed the movement for democratic change under the leadership of Nelson Chamisa.
The publisher of the New York Times has warned President Trump that he's putting lives at risk by frequently denouncing the media. A.J. Salzberger says he told Mr. Trump that his inflammatory language was undermining the democratic ideals of the United States. Iran's currency has continued its record-breaking fall as the country braces for the US to reimpose sanctions next month. The value of the rial has plunged on the unofficial market. $1 now buys more than 100,000 rial. The currency has lost half its worth since April. The return of American sanctions follows President Trump's decision in May to abandon the 2015 nuclear deal. Later, the Malaysian government will publish its final report on what happened to flight MH370. The mystery of what happened to the Malaysia Airlines plane has remained unsolved. It vanished with 239 people on board en route to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur in March 2014. Malaysia has said it would consider resuming the search if new clues came to light. Lewis Hamilton has won the Hungarian Grand Prix, giving him a 21-point lead going into Formula One's August break. It is the 5th win for the Mercedes driver this season. Hamilton now has 213 points. In second place is Ferrari's Sebastian Vettel with 189. Vettel came second in Hungary after surviving a late collision with Hamilton's teammate Valtteri Bottas. Now, some amazing pictures to show you from the ancient Bosnian town of Mostar. For centuries, young men have taken part in a competition which involves leaping, there's one of them, from the Stari Most Bridge, diving 24 metres into the Neretva River below. This year, 40 people took the plunge, some local, some international competitors, and there was an audience there to see them of several thousand.
Now, Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen says he's won a landslide election victory on Sunday. The election is Cambodia's 6th since it emerged from decades of war in 1993, and many have criticised the government for a crackdown on all opposition factions. Hun Sen, who's ruled Cambodia for 33 years, has been re-elected with an estimated 80% of the vote, with his party, the CPP, taking at least 100 of 125 parliamentary seats. The official results won't be announced until mid-August. Now, with me is Michael Vatiokatis, Regional Director of the Centre of Humanitarian Dialogue. Michael, we were expecting this. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion, isn't it? I mean, how credible are these election results, really?
Well, it's going to be very hard, actually, to get sort of facts, because we're relying entirely on the government's election commission. And, you know, international observers have been very limited in their access, and it's mostly come from countries that are not necessarily the most credible election observers. However, from what we can tell, there was a large block of votes that went obviously to the CPP, but it could be that up to 20% of votes in some areas were spoiled. And if you consider that in the last elections, in the commune elections, the local elections in 2017, the opposition got almost, or just a little over 40% of the vote. So let's say that half that total amounts to spoiled votes. And let's also assume that perhaps the government is inflating the actual number of votes and the turnout. So I think a large number of people still registered their displeasure with the government.
So what does this mean then, if there has been that displeasure registered with the government, for the Prime Minister's challenges and priorities going ahead, given that there's been so much criticism about his election victory?
I think there are two things. First of all, on the government side, the challenge is really remains the same. Even if they'd come back to power with a much slimmer majority, which I think would have been the likely outcome, I think what the government is still going to have to address the key issues of corruption and reform of the government. The economy has been doing well, more than 8% growth over the last decade. People are getting better off, but they're also suffering more from higher prices. So the government, the CPP, the Cambodian People's Party, is now going to bear the brunt of those demands for reform. And secondly, I think we have to look at the opposition. The opposition, for all the sympathy that they're getting now, is itself flawed as well. The opposition relied very much on overseas support from the diaspora Cambodian population, who were very much entrenched in their attitude and sentiment against Hun Sen, regarded as a communist. And I think we're going to have to see the opposition grow more sort of grassroots sentiment and support. There was a small grassroots democracy party. It could have done a lot better if it had more time.
Right. So, Michael, when you're looking forward in terms of democracy and the possibility of more loosening up in Cambodia, is that a realistic perspective?
Well, one of the things that, Hun Sen is a famously mercurial, unpredictable leader. And what he may well end up doing, given that there's a degree of pressure from the international community, not as much as many people would have hoped, but a degree, and of course the EU, the European Union, is a major investor in Cambodia.
Right.
He may relax now that he's been re-elected, now that he no longer has to worry about the opposition. He may release the opposition leader. He may start to open up the ground that had been there for civil society just a year ago. And it's quite possible that we'll see a somewhat return to normality.
And thanks, Michael, there from the Centre of Human Relationships and Dialogue.
Thousands of people have been protesting across Russia this weekend against a proposed rise in the pension age. The age for men would rise from 60 to 65, and for women it would go up from 55 to 63. The change was announced at the start of the World Cup, but host cities banned public demonstrations during the event. This weekend was the first time many places, including the capital Moscow, allowed protests. As Sarah Rainsford reports.
The crowd at this demonstration has not been huge, but it is extremely passionate. Pension reform is an issue that many Russians feel very strongly about. It's something that has been delayed by governments here for many, many years, but finally it's been announced and it's sparked protests across Russia. At this one, people have been shouting things including shame. They've been calling this theft. They're saying that it's a stab in the back. It's the end of the social contract between the government and the people. It's a very diverse crowd here, but they're all united in one idea, and that is that they think that this pension reform is wrong.
Yeah, I think that it's not normal to work until you die. So for our country it's something unusual when president and other people who make a decision for our country make it without people's opinion.
I think it's terrible. This way how our government treating our people.
The government insists that this reform is essential, that it is simply unable to carry on paying so many pensions. But 80% of Russians, according to one poll, disagree. Now, President Putin has tried to distance himself from the pension reform to present it as a government bill, but a lot of people in the crowd today simply don't agree with that.
This pension retirement age which we have now, again, existed since 1930s and remained unchanged through a very, very turbulent and difficult times. It was always this way, 60, 55. Something is already broken, the trust is broken. A lot of Russians will never forgive Putin for doing this. Putin!
After a fantastic World Cup, a great party here in Moscow, in Russia, it looks like a very challenging time for Vladimir Putin has now begun.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. The new report that says hepatitis could be eliminated by 2030. We'll speak to one of the report's authors live from Australia.
Also coming up on the programme, we'll have the latest on the wildfires sweeping across Northern California. 5 people have been killed, including 2 children and their great-grandmother.
The US space agency NASA has ordered an investigation after confirmation today that astronauts were cleared to fly while drunk.
The last foot patrol in South Armagh, once an everyday part of the soldiers' lot, drudgery and danger, now no more after almost 4 decades.
If one is on one's own in a private house, not doing any harm to anyone, I don't really see why all these people should wander in and say you're doing something wrong.
6 rare white lion cubs are on the prowl at Worcestershire Park, and already they've been met with a roar of approval from visitors.
They're lovely, yeah, really sweet. Yeah, they were cute.
This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Karishma Vaswani in Singapore.
Hello, I'm Ben Bland in London. Our top stories. Caught on the mountain, the moment trekkers run to escape landslides as a powerful earthquake hits the Indonesian island of Lombok. At least 14 people are dead, and there have been more than 100 aftershocks.
A landslide election victory for Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen. He's been re-elected, but critics say the vote was a sham. And the top story from BBC Sport, cyclist Geraint Thomas has won the Tour de France, crossing the line in Paris to become the first Welshman ever to win the grueling 3-week-long 3,000-kilometre race. Now let's take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, starting with the Straits Times, which is reporting on the earthquake in Indonesia. It says the government has declared a 3-day state of emergency on the Indonesian island of Lombok after 14 people were killed there in the 6.4 magnitude quake. Now, the Gulf News is looking at the release of 17-year-old Palestinian Ahed Tamimi. The report describes her as a protest icon and says she returned home to a hero's welcome after being released at the end of her 8-month sentence for slapping and kicking what the paper describes as occupation soldiers. And finally, the Philippine Daily Inquirer has a lead picture story with a rather urgent warning for motorists in San Jose City. Believe it or not, the paper says that despite the obviously dilapidated condition of this bridge, sagging and cracking, light vehicles are still using it. Now, Ben, what stories are sparking discussions online over there?
Krishma, it's one that's got me checking my phone, actually, because it's all about emojis. You know, those little symbols we use when we're messaging online. I'm sure you're familiar with the smiley face or the heart eyes. I wonder if you've ever used this. That one stands for capital letters, or the one next to it, the aerial tramway. They are the least used symbols on Twitter, according to the emoji tracker, which counts how often each symbol is used in the microblogging service.
More than 400 million people around the world live with viral hepatitis. The Asia-Pacific is the epicenter of the epidemic, with 1 million people dying from hepatitis and its complications per year. That's 3 times as many as with HIV/AIDS. But a new report looking at the infection in Indonesia says the virus can be eliminated by 2030. Now, Dr. Jack Wallace is one of the co-authors of the report, and he joins me live from Melbourne, Australia. Thank you very much, Jack, for joining us on the programme. Tell me, initially, how serious of a problem is this across the Asia-Pacific region?
It's an increasing problem. It's always been a problem, but the magnitude of the problem is increasing. So with the World Health Organization developing a global strategy, there is a need in the Asia-Pacific to increase the response and the magnitude of the response to viral hepatitis.
So tell me, just what are some of the challenges you're facing in Indonesia, particularly where this report has been conducted?
One of the kind of key issues is the fact that Indonesia is such a large country with a large population spread over so many different islands, and the governance of that, of implementing an effective program to reduce the deaths associated with hepatitis is really challenging. So decentralisation of the programs within Indonesia is a huge issue. So you have a national response to viral hepatitis, but how it is implemented with each of the provinces is a key issue.
So how do you overcome these challenges, given how dramatic or large scale they appear to be by your own admission?
I mean, one of the kind of key issues is the availability of resources. The Indonesian government does need to provide more resources and more effective implementation of the national strategy that they have in place to be able to effectively reduce deaths associated from viral hepatitis. One of the key issues is that within Indonesia, it's a population of 265 million people. 19 million people have hepatitis B. Most of them have not been diagnosed yet. And a key issue for the Indonesian government is that people have to pay to be diagnosed. Now, in a country where income is a key issue, that's not going to happen.
Jack, you know, I just want to jump in there. Total elimination is one of the things that the report points out by 2030. Given everything that you've told us, that seems like a rather unrealistic ambition or goal, if you don't mind me saying.
It could be a bit aspirational, but the reality is that governments can respond effectively to hepatitis given enough focus, given the resources and given the commitment. They will be able to effectively eliminate hepatitis. Indonesia has been at the forefront of developing and supporting the World Health Organization in having a global response to hepatitis. And I think that commitment can be shown within that country.
Well, we wish you the best of luck, Jack. Jack Wallace there from Melbourne.
Thank you.
Firefighters in California are battling 17 major wildfires which are raging all along the west coast of North America, from Canada down to New Mexico. The fires have killed 6 people so far, including 2 children. 40,000 people have had to evacuate their homes in the town of Redding in Northern California, from where James Cook has sent this report.
The devastation wrought by the wildfire which roared into Redding is becoming clear. Survivors described an apocalyptic scene as they fled, with swirling tornadoes of flame. Some feared they would not make it.
Homes were exploding, cars were exploding, and I have a wife and kids, and I said, I better FaceTime my wife just in case. I didn't let her know why I was doing it, but I wanted to see her face one more time.
The inferno left hundreds of homes in ruins, and a 5-year-old boy, his 4-year-old sister, and their great-grandmother dead. 2 firefighters were killed too. One, who'd been cutting vegetation with a bulldozer, was 81 years old. And everyone here will tell you they've never seen anything like this.
Every single person that I've talked to so far has made the mention that I don't know why it's doing what it's doing. It's burning differently. It's burning more aggressive than it has in years past. And I know we say that every year, but it's unprecedented.
The firefighters of the American West are now stretched to the limit. More than 10,000 have been deployed in California alone. 130 major fires are blazing across the continent, from New Mexico to Alaska. Canada has more than 40 major wildfires.
Well, this has become normal for California. Fires are now burning year-round rather than just in the summer. And scientists say the reasons for that are human activity, natural weather patterns and a warming climate. James Cook, BBC News in Northern California.
Qatar's successful World Cup bidding team has denied running a covert public relations campaign to discredit rivals for the 2022 football finals. It follows allegations made by the Sunday Times that the Qataris employed a PR agency and former CIA operatives to try and undermine bids by the US and Australia in breach of FIFA rules. Our sports news correspondent Richard Conway reports.
Qatar! It was a moment that stunned sport and the watching world. Ever since that day in 2010, the Qatari World Cup has been embroiled in controversy, and today's Sunday Times has further allegations of wrongdoing. The paper claims to have seen leaked documents that show the Qatari bid team employed a US PR firm and ex-CIA agents to smear its rivals, mainly the United States and Australia. Some of the alleged aspects of the smear campaign include a group of American PE teachers being recruited to ask their US congressman to oppose an American World Cup on the grounds that the money would be better used on high school sports. Grassroots protests were organised at rugby games in Australia opposing the country's bid. Journalists, bloggers and high-profile figures were recruited in each country to hype up negative aspects of their respective bids. There are now calls for FIFA, football's world governing body, to hold an independent inquiry.
And if the Qatari bid team were involved in a campaign like that,
then that means they would have broken the rules of the bidding process. So it's a really serious matter. I think it requires a proper investigation and for FIFA to be involved in investigating that as well.
In a statement, Qatar's Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy said it rejects each and every allegation put forward. FIFA says a thorough investigation into corruption claims was conducted in 2014, with Michael Garcia, a US attorney, clearing Qatar of any wrongdoing. Qatar is locked in a fierce political feud with neighbouring countries Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These claims will therefore be seized upon by its critics as further reason to strip them of the tournament, despite the fact there appears little appetite from FIFA to act. Richard Conway, BBC News.
You've been watching Newsday on the BBC. Stay with us. Have Americans reached the tipping point? Many workers in the US rely on tips to boost their pay, but that could soon change. We'll see why New Yorkers are considering stopping tipping and instead providing the full minimum wage.
Thanks very much for watching. More to come. Stay with us here on BBC World News.